What if I told you that 2.8 million American homes are about to flood the market? That's right. Nearly 3 million properties, most owned by baby boomers, are headed for what industry insiders are calling the silent liquidation. It's happening quietly, methodically, and with almost no mainstream coverage. While headlines focus on interest rates and housing shortages, a demographic tsunami is building that will fundamentally reshape American homeownership for generations. The numbers are staggering. America's largest generation, the baby boomers, control approximately $18.7 trillion in real estate assets. That's more than the GDP of China. And over the next 5 years, a significant portion of these properties will be liquidated as boomers face a perfect storm of healthcare costs, retirement funding shortfalls, and the inevitable transition to assisted living. You might be thinking this sounds like a golden opportunity for buyers. More inventory should mean lower prices, right? A chance for younger generations to finally break into the housing market? The long-awaited great wealth transfer we've all been promised? That's exactly what they want you to believe. Turn on CNBC or Bloomberg and you'll hear the same recycled narrative. The great generational wealth transfer is coming. Financial advisors promote inheritance opportunities. Real estate agents advertise specialties in helping families transition properties. Government statistics celebrate healthy increases in housing inventory. It all sounds so positive, so normal, so natural. But what if this isn't a wealth transfer at all? What if it's a wealth extraction, a systematic acquisition of family homes by corporate interests who have been positioning for this moment for years? Because while the mainstream financial media sells hope to millennials and Gen Z, the institutional players are telling a very different story behind closed doors. I've obtained internal documents from 3 of America's largest senior care facility networks. Their projections are crystal clear. They expect 78% of incoming residents to fully liquidate their real estate holdings within 16 months of admission, not to pass them down, not to maintain them as family assets, to sell them, often at distressed prices, to cover medical costs that Medicare won't touch. Medicare's own projections, buried in appendices and footnotes nobody reads, show that the average boomer will face approximately $108,000 in annual healthcare costs during their final years. And Medicare? It covers just 27% of those expenses. The math is brutally simple. State-by-state inheritance tax data reveals another layer to this crisis. In 17 states, inheriting a property triggers immediate tax liabilities that force many families to sell immediately, regardless of market conditions. But here's what should really concern you. Corporate buyers aren't just waiting for this flood of inventory, they're actively positioning for it. Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm, has created specialized demographic acquisition teams focused exclusively on boomer-heavy zip codes. Invitation Homes, already America's largest single-family landlord, has secured $12 billion in credit facilities specifically earmarked for age-related acquisition opportunities in Florida, Arizona, and California. This isn't a wealth transfer, it's a wealth extraction, and the corporations know exactly when it's coming. Let's talk numbers. Because in this story, the data doesn't just suggest a crisis, it screams it. Every single day, approximately 10,000 baby boomers turn 80 years old. That milestone isn't just symbolic. It's when healthcare costs typically begin their steep climb and the probability of transitioning to assisted living increases dramatically. The boomers collectively hold $18.7 trillion in real estate assets across approximately 32 million properties. Based on current demographic trends and healthcare cost projections, we can expect roughly 2.8 million of these homes to enter what industry analysts call the liquidation phase over the next 5 years. But this isn't evenly distributed across America. There are specific impact zones where the concentration of boomer-owned properties creates localized market vulnerabilities. Florida stands at the epicenter, with approximately 847,000 boomer properties at risk of forced liquidation. The concentration is particularly acute in communities like Naples, Sarasota, and The Villages, America's largest retirement community, where over 70% of single-family homes are owned by individuals over 75. In Arizona, the numbers are equally alarming. Phoenix alone contains 523,000 properties owned by boomers who statistically will require long-term care within the next 7 years. Tucson and Scottsdale present similar profiles. California faces the largest absolute numbers, with approximately 1.2 million boomer-owned properties entering the danger zone. But here, the story takes another twist. California's housing shortage means these properties should, theoretically, hold their value. But the state's inheritance tax structure creates immediate financial pressure on heirs, forcing quick sales that typically occur at 18 to 22% below market value. The state-by-state inheritance tax burden compounds this crisis. In Pennsylvania, inheriting a $400,000 home triggers an immediate tax bill of $20,000. In Nebraska, it's $18,000. In Maryland, $16,000. For many families, these immediate tax liabilities make holding onto inherited properties financially impossible. And while families struggle with these burdens, the healthcare infrastructure supporting aging boomers is showing dangerous signs of strain. Nursing home bankruptcies have increased 41% since 2023. Home healthcare agencies face critical staffing shortages. The cost of memory care has risen 28% in just the last 24 months. This creates a perfect storm: increasing healthcare needs, decreasing support options, and skyrocketing costs that can only be covered by liquidating what is often a family's largest asset, their home. Meanwhile, corporate America isn't just watching this unfold. They're strategically positioning to capitalize on it. Blackstone, through its Invitation Homes subsidiary, has expanded its acquisition teams in the 50 zip codes with the highest concentration of boomer homeowners. Their internal models, revealed in investor presentations I've reviewed, project acquiring properties at 30–40% below pre-pandemic values as distressed boomer families face healthcare funding emergencies. American Homes 4. Rent has secured $8.7 billion in dedicated financing for what they euphemistically call demographic transition acquisitions, corporate speak for buying homes from elderly owners facing medical costs or from their estates. Regional banks are quietly expanding their foreclosure departments, with internal projections showing a 3% increase in age-related defaults over the next 36 months. Insurance companies have developed actuarial models that can predict, with disturbing accuracy, exactly when specific neighborhoods will face liquidation pressures. Now, you might be thinking there must be solutions, government programs, financial products, or family options that could prevent this massive transfer of wealth from families to corporations. And there are attempts. Government-backed reverse mortgage programs promise to let seniors age in place while tapping their equity. But the fine print reveals crushing terms that typically result in full property surrender within 4–7 years, often at values far below market. Some states have proposed inheritance tax relief, but state budgets simply can't absorb the revenue loss, particularly as they face increasing Medicaid burdens from the same aging population. Family assistance programs exist, but with younger generations facing their own housing crises and record student debt, the capacity to financially support aging parents is severely limited. The math simply doesn't work for most American families. Community land trusts represent a promising alternative, but their capacity is minuscule compared to the scale of the problem. The 250 largest community land trusts in America have collectively protected just 35,000 properties, a drop in the ocean against 2.8 million homes at risk. The hard reality is that these attempts at solutions aren't just insufficient, they often accelerate the problem. Reverse mortgages create more debt, not relief, typically ending in foreclosure rather than preserved equity. State budgets can't handle meaningful inheritance tax relief, forcing quick sales regardless of market conditions. Families increasingly choose debt over property, with senior-held debt increasing 543% since 2001, according to Federal Reserve data. Corporate buyers are now routinely offering 40% below market value for properties owned by seniors facing medical crises, knowing the owners have no leverage and limited time. Regional banks are systematically refusing to finance inherited properties in certain zip codes, effectively forcing cash sales to the only buyers with sufficient liquidity: institutional investors. What we're witnessing isn't a single market crash, but multiple, simultaneous market failures. a healthcare funding crisis, an inheritance system that forces liquidation, a banking system that restricts financing precisely when families need it most, and corporate buyers with unprecedented market power. And here's what should really concern you. The liquidation isn't starting in 2026. It started 18 months ago. We're just now seeing the data. Let's assess the devastation that's already occurring and what's coming next. When we talk about 2.8 million family homes becoming corporate rentals, we're not just describing a real estate trend. We're witnessing the largest transfer of wealth from individual Americans to financial institutions in modern history. Approximately $4.2 trillion in generational wealth being systematically extracted from families. The geographic impact is already visible. Small towns where boomers represent 60–70% of homeowners are seeing properties sit empty as families struggle to maintain them or find buyers. Rushville, Indiana. Palatka, Florida. Zapata, Texas. Communities where the only growth industry is property management companies acquiring homes from distressed senior sellers or their estates. Regional economies dependent on property taxes are showing early signs of collapse. When homes sell for 30–40% below previous values, tax receipts plummet. School districts in retirement-heavy communities from Arizona to Maine are facing unprecedented budget shortfalls. Infrastructure maintenance is being deferred. Municipal bonds are being downgraded. But the most profound shift might be cultural, the end of suburban homeownership as a middle-class norm. When corporate landlords control 35–40% of single-family homes in a community, as they already do in parts of Atlanta, Charlotte, and Phoenix, they effectively control pricing for both purchases and rentals. The American dream isn't just becoming more difficult. In many communities, it's being systematically acquired. The human impact is equally devastating. Families are being forced to sell below market value as healthcare emergencies leave no alternatives. Adult children expecting to inherit wealth are instead inheriting debt and difficult decisions. Rural communities are becoming corporate-owned rental zones where tenants have no path to ownership. Local businesses are closing as population dynamics shift and spending power declines. This is not a theoretical future. It's the present reality in hundreds of American communities. But within this crisis, unexpected patterns of resilience are emerging. Community land trusts have protected approximately 15,000 properties in the past 24 months alone. Small compared to the overall numbers, but representing critical innovation in community ownership models. Cooperative ownership structures are gaining traction, particularly in rural areas where neighbors are pooling resources to acquire properties that might otherwise go to institutional buyers. Counterintuitively, some rural areas are becoming affordable again as corporate buyers focus on suburban markets, creating potential opportunities for remote workers seeking affordable homeownership. Local governments in places like Yellow Springs, Ohio, and Lawrence, Kansas, have implemented restrictions on corporate purchases, requiring ownership transparency and limiting the percentage of rental properties allowed in specific neighborhoods. These developments aren't yet turning the tide, but they represent critical experiments in community resistance and alternative ownership models. For those navigating this new landscape, whether as potential buyers, sellers, or community members, understanding the emerging patterns is essential. The reality is that cash buyers now have unprecedented power in most markets. When families need to sell quickly due to healthcare costs or inheritance tax burdens, cash offers, even at significant discounts, often represent the only viable option. Corporate landlords effectively control pricing in major markets, creating artificial floors and ceilings that benefit their business models rather than communities. Understanding these corporate acquisition patterns is critical for anyone trying to time market entry. Rural properties increasingly require new ownership models as traditional financing becomes harder to secure. Community investment trusts, fractional ownership, and cooperative models represent potential alternatives to both individual mortgages and corporate acquisition. Inheritance planning must now include liquidation strategies. The traditional assumption that properties will simply transfer to the next generation no longer holds in an era of skyrocketing healthcare costs and immediate tax liabilities. Community-based solutions are increasingly replacing individual ownership dreams. The emerging reality is that preservation preservation of neighborhood character and affordability often requires collective action rather than individual financial strategies. The American dream of homeownership didn't die. It was systematically acquired. But in this new landscape, those who understand the rules can still navigate successfully. For families with aging parents, understanding the healthcare funding crisis is the essential first step. Medicare will not cover long-term care costs. Medicaid requires the spending down of virtually all assets. These realities must be confronted years before healthcare emergencies force crisis-driven decisions. For potential buyers, particularly younger generations, understanding which markets are likely to see the greatest inventory increases and price pressures creates both risks and opportunities. The regions with the highest concentration of boomer homeowners will experience the greatest disruption, but also potentially the greatest buying opportunities for those positioned with cash or secure financing. For communities, recognizing the early warning signs of corporate acquisition patterns allows for preventative policy measures before neighborhood character is irrevocably altered. The most successful resistance models involve community right of first purchase agreements, transparency requirements for corporate buyers, and incentives for owner occupancy. This isn't just a housing story. It's not just a demographic trend. What we're witnessing is nothing less than the largest restructuring of American property ownership since the 2008 financial crisis, but this time happening largely out of public view, without dramatic foreclosure signs or front-page headlines. The silent liquidation of 2.8 million homes represents both devastating loss and potential opportunity. The difference between those outcomes depends entirely on awareness, preparation, and strategic response. That's why this channel will be tracking this crisis market by market, week by week. We'll identify corporate acquisition patterns before they become obvious. We'll highlight regional opportunities for informed buyers. We'll cover community resistance strategies that are working. We'll examine policy responses that protect family wealth rather than institutional interests. The rules of American homeownership are being rewritten by demographic reality and corporate strategy. But knowledge remains power, especially in markets driven by information asymmetry. The Great Liquidation is already underway. The question is no longer whether it will happen, but who will benefit, who will lose, and how individuals and communities can navigate this fundamentally altered landscape. Subscribe now to stay ahead of this demographic tsunami, because in the coming wealth extraction, the difference between being prepared and being exploited will be determined by one factor above all others: being informed before others recognize what's happening. The silent liquidation won't be silent anymore, not for those who are listening.